It started on an ordinary evening, in the kind of place where strangers brushed past each other without leaving a trace. A small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. The hum of conversations mixed with the soft notes of a piano drifting from the speakers. People came here for the coffee, for the calm, or simply to get away from the chaos of the world outside. For him, it was just another stop on his way home. He wasn't looking for anyone, wasn't expecting anything. He simply wanted a cup of coffee and perhaps a moment of silence. But fate, if you believe in such things, had a way of planting surprises in the middle of ordinary days. She walked in and the air shifted. Not in the dramatic way movies often show it, with heads turning or glasses dropping, but in a subtler way. The kind of shift you feel before you even realize why. She carried herself with a confidence that was almost defiant. Her steps were unhurried, her eyes sharp, scanning the room not as though she was searching for someone, but as though she wanted to make sure no one found her. He noticed her instantly, not because she was the most beautiful woman in the cafe, though she was striking, but because she seemed untouchable. There was a distance in her presence, a silent wall around her that warned people not to get too close. She ordered a drink and sat alone by the window. Her phone was in her hand, but she wasn't scrolling like everyone else. She wasn't hiding behind a screen. She just sat there, sipping slowly, watching the street outside as though it belonged to her. Something about that quiet boldness pulled him in. He didn't plan to, but after a few hesitant minutes, he stood, coffee in hand, and made his way toward her table. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, careful, his tone light. Her eyes lifted from the window to him. She studied him for a second longer than most people would, as if measuring him up. Then, without a word, she gestured to the seat across from her. That was the beginning. The conversation was nothing special at first. Weather, work, the small, forgettable topics strangers used to fill silences. But there was an edge to it. She answered questions without really answering them. She asked about him, but only in ways that didn't reveal anything about herself. She laughed once, quietly, almost as if she was surprised she could. It was only when he asked for her name that the wall came back up. "No names," she said simply, setting her cup down. He thought she was joking. "No names." She shook her head. "Not yours. Not mine. Just you and me and now." Her tone was final, the kind that didn't invite negotiation. And yet, something in her eyes dared him to push, to ask why. But he didn't. He only nodded. "All right," he said. "No names." A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Good. That was her first rule. And it would not be the last. Over the next hour, she laid out her conditions like a contract. Cold, precise, without flinching. No phone calls. No texts outside the agreed-upon times. No addresses, no pasts, no future plans. No emotions. No attachments. We meet when we meet, we talk, we laugh, we leave. That's all. He raised an eyebrow. So, like, casual friends. Not friends, she corrected quickly. Not lovers either. Just two people who meet when they want to escape everything else. No responsibilities. No questions. No ties. Sounded absurd, almost like a game. But she was serious. Her tone left no room for doubt. Most men would have walked away right then. Who wanted to invest time in someone who set walls higher than the sky. But something about her challenge stirred something inside him. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the thrill of rules so sharp and unforgiving. Or perhaps it was the simple fact that she was unlike anyone he'd ever met before. So he smiled. "All right. I'll play by your rules." And just like that, the contract was sealed. Not with signatures, but with silence. When he left the cafe that evening, he couldn't shake the thought of her. Not her name, not her story. He had none of that. Just her presence. The way she had looked at him as if she was daring him to break her rules. The way her voice carried both distance and depth. She was a puzzle, and he had always loved puzzles. What he didn't know was that puzzles, once solved, often lose their mystery. And sometimes, the one who creates the rules ends up being the one who breaks them first. But that Was a truth waiting in the distance? For now, it was simply two strangers with no names, bound by rules that neither fully understood, stepping into a game neither knew how to end. The first rule about their arrangement was silence. Not silence in the sense of no talking, but silence in the sense of absence. Outside their meetings, they did not exist in each other's worlds. No texts, no late-night calls, no random check-ins. Only the moments they agreed upon and then vanish. And surprisingly, it worked. They met again 2 weeks after that first encounter, in the same cafe. No plans had been made in between. He simply returned one evening, curious to see if she would be there, and she was. Sitting at the same table by the window, coffee in hand, as though she had never left. When she looked up and saw him, a spark flickered across her face. So quick, so faint, he almost missed it. But it was there. "You came back," she said. "I was curious," he replied, "to see if the rules still applied." He smirked. "They always apply." And so began their game. At first, their conversations were light. They talked about the weather, the books stacked on the cafe's shelves, and random strangers passing by outside. She was careful, never mentioning family, never sharing her job, never letting a piece of her real life slip into their world. He respected that, even though the temptation to ask was strong. But as the days stretched into weeks, he noticed something unusual. For all her rules about detachment, she came alive during their meetings. Her laughter was genuine, unrestrained. She leaned in when she spoke, her eyes dancing in the low light of the cafe. "You're good at this," he told her once. "At what?" she asked. "At disappearing. At making it feel like this is separate from everything else." Her smile faded slightly. "That's the point." He didn't press further, but he couldn't help wondering, what was she hiding from? Why build walls so high unless there was something dangerous on the other side? One evening she surprised him. "Let's not meet here next time," she said, stirring her coffee slowly. "Where then?" He paused, thinking. "Somewhere open. Park maybe. Less predictable." It was a small shift, but it felt significant. For weeks, the cafe had been their safe ground, their unspoken sanctuary. Suggesting somewhere new was like moving the chessboard in the middle of a match. He agreed anyway. "All right, a park." And so they did. The park was alive with evening joggers and families on picnic blankets. But in the small corner they chose, it felt like another world. They sat on a bench, eating roasted corn from a street vendor, laughing at the absurdity of pigeons chasing each other across the grass. He noticed that she was different here. Lighter, almost childlike. She teased him, nudged him with her elbow when he made a bad joke, and even threw a piece of corn kernel at him when he wouldn't stop talking. It was easy to forget the rules in moments like these. Easy to believe they were just two people, slowly falling into something that wasn't supposed to happen. But then, just as he felt the warmth between them linger a little too long, she pulled back. "Remember," she said firmly, though her voice wavered. "No emotions. No attachments." He nodded, hiding his smile. "Of course. Just fun." But he could see it. Her walls weren't as strong as she thought. And that realization was dangerous. Because once cracks appear, walls never truly hold. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about her again. Not her name, not her past, not even her voice. But the way her laughter had spilt in the park, unguarded, free. He wanted more of that. And though he had agreed to the rules, a part of him knew this was only the beginning of breaking them. Rules are easy to make when the heart is quiet. But hearts are never quiet for long. Their meetings continued, sometimes in the cafe, sometimes in the park, and once even in a quiet bookstore where they wandered the aisles pretending to be strangers who had just bumped into each other. Every time, she reminded him of the boundaries. No names, no calls, no addresses, no emotions. And every time he agreed with a smile. But slowly, almost invisibly, the cracks began to show. It started small. One afternoon in the cafe, he noticed the way she stirred her drink absent-mindedly, lost in thought. When he asked what she was thinking, she hesitated. For a brief moment, it looked like she might actually tell him. Her lips parted, then closed again, and instead she deflected with a joke. But the look lingered in her eyes. A look of someone carrying something heavy. Another time in the park, it was he who slipped. They had been laughing about a jogger whose dog was pulling him too fast, and in the middle of the laughter he said, "You remind me of my sister when she laughs like that." Her smile vanished. "You're not supposed to say things like that," she said quietly. "Like what?" "Like family. Real things. We said no attachments." He raised his hands in mock surrender. All right. No family talk." But inside, he couldn't help noticing how quickly she had reacted, as though she was terrified of being connected to someone else's world. The bookstore visit was when the rules bent the most. They had agreed to walk separately, then accidentally meet in one of the aisles. She was holding a poetry book, flipping through it with her fingers, when he walked up behind her. "Good choice," he said. He turned startled. "I didn't hear you. Maybe I didn't want you to." She rolled her eyes, but her lips curved slightly. "You're enjoying this game too much. Maybe. Or maybe I'm enjoying you too much." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Her eyes softened for just a second, then hardened again. She closed the book and placed it back on the shelf. "Careful," she said. That sounded a lot like emotion. "Maybe it was just honesty," he countered. But she shook her head. Honesty leads to questions, and questions lead to places we're not supposed to go. For someone so firm on rules, she broke one herself later that day. As they left the bookstore, weaving through the crowded street, a motorbike zoomed too close, startling her. Without thinking, she grabbed his arm. Her grip was tight, almost desperate, and for the first time he felt the walls around her tremble. "You're all right," he said softly, covering her hand with his. She let go quickly, almost as if ashamed of the instinct. "That was nothing," she muttered. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. Because for the first time she had reached for him. The cracks deepened as weeks passed. She began asking him small questions that hinted at curiosity. "Do you live nearby? What kind of work do you do?" Each time, she would catch herself and laugh it off, but the questions had already been asked. And sometimes he noticed. She looked at him as though trying to memorize his face. Not in the casual way of two strangers passing time, but in the way people look when they're afraid of forgetting someone important. He didn't confront her about it. He simply let the moments happen. One evening, as they sat quietly watching the city lights from a bench, she broke the silence herself. "Do you ever wonder," she said slowly, "what would happen if we ignored the rules?" He turned to look at her, but she didn't meet his eyes. "Maybe," he said. "But maybe that's the point of the rules. To stop us from finding out." She gave a hollow laugh. "Maybe." But her voice betrayed her. She wanted to know. That night he realized the truth. The game was no longer hers alone. Had become theirs. And the cracks in the rules were no longer cracks, they were doorways. Rules are fragile things. Sometimes they don't shatter in a dramatic moment. They crumble quietly, piece by piece, until you realize they were never strong at all. For her, the slip began with a name. They had just finished another evening at the park, watching children play until the streetlights flickered on. As they stood to leave, he made a casual joke, something about how pigeons seemed to love her more than people did. She laughed, and then, without thinking, she said, "Stop it, Daniel." The name hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. He froze. The silence that followed was heavier than anything they had shared before. "How do you?" he started. Her eyes widened, and she covered her mouth with her hand. I didn't mean to say that." "But you did." "I don't know why," she whispered, almost to herself. "It just slipped." For weeks, she had held onto her rules with iron hands. No names, no attachments, no crossing into real life. And yet, in that small, unguarded moment, her lips had betrayed her. He didn't push. He simply smiled gently, as if to ease her panic. "Daniel, huh?" he said lightly. I'll take it. I like the sound of it. She shook her head quickly. No, forget it. Pretend I never said it. But he didn't forget. And neither did she. From that moment on, their meetings were different. The walls weren't just cracking, they were collapsing. The next slip came a week later, in the bookstore again. She had picked up the same poetry book she had once put back. This time she bought it. When he teased her about finally giving in, she smiled and admitted something she shouldn't have. I used to love poetry when I was younger, she said softly. My father used to read it to me. She realized her mistake too late. She had given him a piece of her life, a shard of her real self. Your father? He asked gently. She nodded, then quickly shook her head. No, forget I said that. It's not important. But it was important, because for the first time she had placed herself in the real world, not the bubble of their game. The third slip wasn't words at all, it was touch. They were sitting side by side on a park bench, the silence between them comfortable. A cold wind swept through, and without hesitation, she leaned into him. Not dramatically, not even consciously, but her shoulder brushed his, her warmth pressing close. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply let her rest there, even if only for a minute. When she realized what she had done, she pulled away sharply. We can't, she said. We didn't, he replied calmly. But they both knew better. By now, the rules were more broken than kept. She knew it, he knew it. And yet, neither walked away. One evening, she arrived late to their usual spot at the cafe. Her face was pale, her eyes red as though she had been crying. He didn't ask questions. He simply slid his coffee toward her. She took it silently, sipping without a word. Minutes passed before she finally spoke. Do you ever feel like you're running from yourself? He looked at her, his chest tightening. All the time. Her lips trembled with a half-smile. That's what this was supposed to be for me. An escape. But now... She stopped herself. But now, he pressed gently. She shook her head. Nothing. Forget it. But he knew. The escape was no longer working. The walls she had built so carefully were collapsing under the weight of her own heart. And then came the slip that sealed it all. They were walking along a quiet street after leaving the cafe, the city lights painting the night in gold and silver. She stopped suddenly, turning to him with a look that burned through the dark. Do you ever think about me when I'm not here? She asked. He hesitated. Do you want the truth? She nodded slowly. All the time, he said. Her breath hitched. For a moment, she looked as though she might run. But instead, she whispered, almost too softly to hear. Me too. And with those two words, every rule she had made was shattered. That night, she didn't vanish into the shadows after their goodbye. Instead, she lingered. She looked at him as though memorizing his face, her fingers twitching like she wanted to reach for him but was afraid. When she finally walked away, he knew nothing would be the same, because she had broken her own challenge. And once broken, some rules can never be rebuilt. There is a point in every game where the rules no longer matter. They may have begun as guidelines, as boundaries to keep order, but once emotions sneak in, the rules become nothing more than shadows. And that was where they found themselves now, standing in the ruins of the walls she had built. Their meetings grew more frequent. She stopped waiting for weeks between encounters. Instead, she appeared every few days, sometimes even back-to-back evenings. The excuses she used at first, I just happened to be in the area, I needed fresh air, soon disappeared altogether. She no longer pretended. She wanted to be there, with him. And though she never admitted it outright, he saw it in the way her eyes softened when she spotted him across the cafe, in the way her laughter came easier, in the way her hands lingered a moment too long when they brushed against his. The rules were gone. All that remained was them. One evening, after they left the cafe, she didn't turn down her usual street. Instead, she kept walking beside him. Where are we going? He asked. I don't know, she replied. Does it matter? Didn't. They wandered the city aimlessly, letting the streets guide them. Neon lights reflected on wet pavement from an earlier rain, the air cool and alive. They talked about nothing. Jokes, random observations, even made-up stories about strangers they passed. But beneath the surface chatter was a tension neither could ignore. At one point, she stopped at a bridge overlooking the river. The water shimmered with the glow of passing cars, and for the first time she didn't speak. She just stood there, staring at the dark waves below. He joined her, the silence stretching between them. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently. She hesitated, her lips parting as though to confess something, then shut again. Finally, she whispered, "I don't want to be afraid anymore." Afraid of what, she didn't say. But he didn't need her to. He understood. The next slip was no accident, it was deliberate. They were sitting on a park bench, a late evening breeze rustling the trees. She leaned in close, her voice quiet. "Do you ever wish we could just forget the rules completely? Pretend we never made them?" He smiled softly. "I already have." Her eyes glistened in the dim light, as though those words broke something inside her. She inhaled deeply, then exhaled, almost in surrender. "Then I suppose I should stop pretending too," she said. And then, without hesitation this time, she reached for his hand. It wasn't the playful, fleeting touches they had shared before. It was firm, steady, her fingers intertwining with his as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. From then on, everything changed. They still didn't speak of names or addresses, but the silence between them was no longer about secrecy. It was about comfort. They began to talk more openly about their days, slipping in fragments of real life. He told her about a project at work. She shared a story about her childhood. Piece by piece, they were weaving threads of truth into the fabric of their meetings. And yet, the fear remained, especially for her. One evening, she pulled away suddenly after laughing too hard at something he said. "This isn't supposed to happen," she murmured, almost to herself. "What isn't?" he asked. "This." She gestured between them. "We were supposed to keep it simple. No attachments, no feelings. No this." He leaned back, studying her. "Then why are you still here?" She opened her mouth, but no answer came. Because the truth was simple and terrifying. She didn't know how to let go. The unspoken truths hung heavy between them in the weeks that followed. He could feel her fighting it, pulling herself back even as she reached forward. Some days she was warm, open, laughing freely. Other days she was distant, her guard snapping back up as though punishing herself for being vulnerable. But no matter how hard she tried, she kept slipping. The final moment came late one night. They were sitting in the cafe long after most customers had left, the air filled with the faint hum of the espresso machine. She was unusually quiet, her eyes tracing patterns on the table. Finally, she looked up, her voice trembling. "I don't know who I am with you," she admitted. "And that terrifies me." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Maybe you're just you. No rules, no walls, just you." Her eyes filled, and for the first time she didn't pull away. And though the rules had begun as hers, it was she who had broken every single one. That night, when they parted ways, there was no goodbye. Only silence, the kind that carries more than words ever could. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew. The game was over. And what lay ahead was no longer a game at all. Every story begins with rules. And every love story begins when those rules are broken. For weeks, they had danced on the fragile line between distance and desire, between denial and surrender. She had drawn the boundaries. He had respected them. But slowly, steadily, she had erased them with her own hands. And now, at last, there were no more rules left to break. It happened on a rainy evening. The city was awash in silver, the streets glistening under the downpour. He was already seated in the cafe, waiting, the sound of raindrops tapping against the glass. She arrived late, drenched, her hair sticking to her cheeks, her eyes wide and searching. "You're soaked," he said, rising quickly. "I didn't care," she replied breathlessly. I just had to be here." He grabbed a napkin and tried to hand it to her, but she ignored it. Instead, she leaned on the table, her chest heaving as though she had run from more than the rain. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. His heart clenched. "Do what?" "This game. These rules. Pretending not to feel what I feel." Her voice cracked. "I thought I could keep it simple. I thought I could protect myself. But every time I see you, I want more. Every time I leave, I want to come back. I broke everything I built. And I don't care anymore." The words spilled from her like a confession she had buried too long. Her eyes glistened, not with rain, but with something far deeper. He didn't hesitate. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Then don't protect yourself," he said softly. "Not from me." For the first time, she didn't flinch at his touch. She didn't pull back, didn't remind him of conditions or rules. Instead, she leaned forward, closing the space between them. And there, in the quiet corner of the cafe where their story had begun, her lips found his. It wasn't a dramatic kiss, not the kind you see in movies with music swelling and strangers clapping. It was soft, trembling, filled with all the words they had never spoken. A kiss not of passion alone, but of surrender. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "My name is Elena," she whispered. His chest tightened, not because of the name itself, but because of what it meant. She had given him the one thing she had sworn to withhold, the truth. He smiled gently. "Elena." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, but she was smiling too. From that night on, there were no more rules. They exchanged numbers. They shared stories. She told him about her childhood, about her fears, about the walls she had built to protect herself from ever being hurt again. He listened, not judging, not pushing, just being there. And he shared too. His dreams, his mistakes, his own fears of vulnerability. Piece by piece, they built something real, not out of secrecy and boundaries, but out of honesty and trust. It wasn't perfect. She still stumbled, still tried to retreat into her shell some days. But now, when she slipped, he was there to hold her hand and remind her she wasn't alone. The woman who had once declared no names, no emotions, no attachments, had broken her own challenge. And in doing so, she had found the very thing she thought she was protecting herself from: love. Months later, on another ordinary evening in the cafe, she teased him with a smile. "You know, you never told me your real name." He laughed, sipping his coffee. "I was waiting for the right moment." She leaned forward playfully. "And when would that be?" He grinned. "Right now. My name is Daniel." She burst out laughing, covering her mouth in disbelief. "No, you're joking." "I'm not. But that's the name I accidentally called you that night." He raised his brows. "Maybe you just knew before I told you." She shook her head, still laughing. "Fate, then." He reached for her hand across the table. "Or maybe just us." And in that moment, as the cafe lights glowed warm around them, they both knew. This was no longer a game. This was their story. Theirs alone.